Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from in the world today. My name's Chris Fair. I'm the president of Resonance Consultancy, based in Vancouver and New York. It's a pleasure to have you joining us today for our third World City Virtual Summit on the Destination City, where we're going to dive into and discuss the intersection between talent attraction, the tourism economy, and business and investment attraction within our cities and urban economies. We've got a great lineup of speakers joining us from around the world today, ranging from London to New York to Tel Aviv to Toronto to Manchester. And of course, I'm in Vancouver with you today. We also have author and expert on the experience economy, Joe Pine. He originally authored the experience economy more than 20 years ago. And I'm looking forward to catching up with Joe on some of the trends that he sees in terms of what the post-pandemic experience economy looks like and the emergence of what he's calling the transformation economy for us to think about. So to start us off, though, we're going to be going over to London with Laura Citron, the CEO of London & Partners. London & Partners is a unique organization that focuses both on international business and being the destination agency for London. She leads the organization to grow London's global reputation and to attract businesses, tourists, students, events, and talent to London. It's great to have you joining us today, Laura. Thanks so much, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say about the future of destination cities and the experience economy.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's fantastic to be here. I'm really looking forward to hearing what the other cities from around the world have to share. And as you said, you asked me, Chris, you gave me a tough job, which was to come and talk about the role of experiences in the work that we all do in promoting our cities and our economies. So I will do my best. And what I thought I would do was start with just a short introduction to London & Partners, because we're quite unusual in our governance and our mandate, and then talk a little bit about the work that we do to support businesses and business attraction into London, and then end on the role of experiences and why we think experiences are so critical to that, and then really looking forward to a chat with you at the end, Chris. So by way of introduction, London & Partners is the business and destination agency for London. So our mission is to create economic growth that is resilient and sustainable and inclusive. We are a public-private organisation, so we're funded partly by the Mayor of London, but also by a large network of businesses across the city who support our work, and also by our own commercial ventures, and we reinvest the profit from our ventures in the work that we do for the city. We have a slightly unusual mandate in that it's quite broad for an agency of our sort. So we are responsible for inward investment and trade. We're also the destination agency, which is like the tourism board. So we're responsible for attracting tourists and events to the city. We also have a new mandate supporting small businesses to access support to grow within our city. We promote London's brand globally. And of course, we have our commercial and partnerships. And it's in the name, London & Partners. Everything we do in partnership with businesses in the city. So London is a global city, and thank you so much, Chris, because you're very generous in awarding us world #1 city. And so I think London hopefully needs little introduction, but just briefly, why is London so resilient as a global city? Well, we think it's because it has a real breadth of strengths. So yes, it has fantastic connectivity, by which we mean transport connectivity, but also time zone and English language. Customers, what attracts businesses and what helps them to grow is access to their customers. And London has one of the biggest concentrations of headquarters and major business decision makers in the world. Capital, it is of course a global financial centre with deep pools of capital. Fantastic lifestyle and culture, and we'll come back to this when we talk about experiences. By ecosystem, we mean fantastic support from venture capital, from incubators, accelerators, universities, local authorities, lots and lots of scaffolding around businesses to really help them to thrive. And of course, talent. London's home to 4 of the world's top 40 best universities, one of the biggest international student populations in the world. So it's a really vibrant city for talent, but also for research and development, and those two things often go together. So what do we do to support businesses? London and Partners, we support businesses expanding into the city and also London-born companies that are expanding globally. And we help with the strategy for internationalization, making sure that our clients are accessing the best possible advice from experts who really understand their sector and their geography, helping them to think about how to build their team and their culture, and particularly working with founders on how to build an inclusive team. London's a hugely diverse city, and it's very important for us that the growth that we create in London benefits all Londoners, and that the jobs that these high growth companies create are accessible for all Londoners. So we work hard to connect them with skilled people in communities in London. Of course, lots of businesses come to London because they want to raise capital. So we help them to meet investors and we help them to meet clients and make sure that they're plugged into a supportive ecosystem, whether that's getting them into the right events, into the right networks, meeting peers and buddies from their sector that they can work with. So that's broadly how we're supporting companies to grow in the city. And underlying all of this is our belief that human networks are a key competitive advantage for any city. It's the human networks which are the invisible infrastructure that make a city strong. And we all know about network effects and clusters. And one of London's great strengths is the openness of our networks. Our networks are probably uniquely porous and inclusive. Businesses and people and ideas from around the world can come to London and be part of the community and belong. And that's something that we really focus on because we think it's a key competitive advantage. It may not be so tangible, but it's a real driver. So over the 10 and more years that we've been around, we've helped over 2,500 international businesses to set up in London, a similar number to expand internationally, created around 70,000 jobs in the city, and lots more on the tourism side. But obviously, the pandemic was a real moment of reckoning for London, as I'm sure it was for many of you. And for me, one of the things that really hit home for us in London was how dependent we were on international visitors. And this is probably obvious because London is a global city, a hugely open and international trading city. But I think we had always thought of tourism as the icing on the cake. Like, London's really great, and because London's really great, tourists come and visit. That was our previous logic pre-pandemic. And COVID flipped that on its head. And we understood that tourism isn't the icing on the cake. Tourism is what makes the cake. Because suddenly, when we didn't have our international tourists, we realized that it's very difficult to sustain world-class, amazing museums and galleries and a really vibrant food scene with the best chefs from around the world and incredible theatre and live performance and music and sport. And all of that is held up by international tourist spend. And so what we realized was actually the experience is at the heart of London's advantage and what makes London a successful global city. Because London is just a brilliant place to be, and I hope those of you who haven't visited will visit us soon. Because London is a fantastic place to be, we attract students and we attract talent from all over the world because they want to be there. And because we have the best brains, we get great innovation, and that drives business growth through trade and investment. And that attracts the capital because the businesses are there. And that in turn allows us to invest and to build and to further the experience. But that experience needs that loop on the left-hand side. It needs that international visitor spend to sustain the experience. And so our moment of reckoning during COVID was to understand that actually tourism isn't the icing on the cake. It's a really fundamental driver of our city's business attractiveness, as well as our tourism attractiveness. A final point to end on. I often get asked in events and panels like this, who's the competition for London? Who are you worried about? You know, is it New York? Is it Singapore? Is it Shanghai? Is it Dubai? You know, who is it? Paris? Is it Amsterdam? And increasingly, my view is it's none of those. The real competition for global cities is not each other. It's the internet and slippers. And why do I say that? it's the internet and slippers, because the competition for a global city like London is not other places, it's people just staying at home. Why do I need to travel to meet my clients and do business meetings and events if I can do it hybrid? Why do I need to go out to a restaurant when I can get fantastic food delivered to my door? Why do I need to go on a trip to London when I can have immersive experiences in my living room with my slippers on that are amazing? And the tech companies that are driving the development of the metaverse and immersive experiences are investing billions in trying to keep everybody at home in their slippers attached to the internet. And our challenge as global cities is to create real connections with people and live experiences which cannot be replaced. And the only things which can't be replaced and I don't think can be recreated online are experiences and connections. Experiences like that feeling of being in a stadium full of people, or in a live comedy performance, or walking down a busy street. That feeling of being with others you can't recreate. And the quality of a human relationship that we can build with a person in real life, whether that's to drive a business deal, or whether it's for innovation or for research. And so that's what we're really focused on. How do we make London the most amazing experience? And how do we keep connecting people so that we use those human connections as our points of differentiation? So I'll stop there. Our real competition is the internet and slippers. And Chris, I know we're going to have hopefully a great chat about it now. So back to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Laura. I couldn't agree more with many of the points that you made, and loads of questions. And I love your quote to start off. I do think in many cities, in most economies, destinations, we think about tourism as being the icing on the cake. And I love your quote there, how tourism is what makes the cake. So looking at London now, as things we sort of seem to be settling into some kind of a new normal, what does that look like in terms of, there have international visitors returned? Does that visitor economy, what makes the cake, has that changed in any way, or has it kind of gone back to the way it was in 2019?
So I'm really pleased to say we've seen a very strong post-COVID tourism recovery, particularly from North America, where we are significantly above pre-pandemic levels. In the immediate recovery from COVID, we saw quite unusual patterns with very short booking windows and unusual seasonality and slightly different geographies to what we'd expect. But actually this year, we see quite a return to the norm. So we see the usual seasonality patterns of different source markets coming in at the usual kind of times of year. Booking windows have pretty much normalized. We've got a very strong pipeline of big events coming in. So that events is really back. The bit of the market that for us is still not back is the Chinese tourists. And China was our second biggest source market after the US pre-pandemic. So that is quite a big missing chunk of our visitor economy. But we're really looking forward to welcoming Chinese visitors back later this year, and all the indications are, we would expect to see a full recovery of the Chinese outbound market by the end of the year or early next year.
Great. So as tourism seems to be recovering, coming back much faster than office occupancy at our central business districts, what role does tourism now become even more of the cake, or more important in terms of maintaining the vibrancy of the city, demand for experiences that relates to restaurants, retail, et cetera? Is it up to tourism to kind of make up for that gap of what we may have lost in terms of office workers in our city centers? How do you look at that kind of relationship and that balance between visitors and the office attendants?
Yeah, you're right. It's partly tourists, but it's leisure spend more broadly, and it's also leisure spend from the domestic audience. And London is a big city. We have a population of 9 million, 12 million within the sort of slightly larger regional area. So it has a big domestic economy as well for leisure. What we're seeing, like many cities, is obviously significant levels of hybrid working, but actually leisure travel and leisure spend is pretty strong, but with different patterns. So what we see, for example, is that so Thursday night is the new Friday night. So we see lots of people going out after work on a Thursday, and that always used to be a very tradition in the UK. On a Friday, go to the pub with your colleagues. But if we look, for example, at public transport ridership, the leisure ridership in the evenings, like after 5 o'clock on a Friday and over the weekend, is really strong. So Londoners and tourists are out and about in the city. They are spending, they're going to cafes, you know, they're going to the theatre. The demand is there, but the pattern has changed. There are definitely, though, areas in our city which are suffering more than others because they've been historically more dependent on office workers. So, for example, for us, the city, the Square Mile, our central financial district, Canary Wharf, and some other pockets around town. And they're making real efforts to become more mixed economies. So there's a big push at the moment, for example, to make the city a real visitor destination with leisure and attractions and shopping, so that we're driving footfall to those parts of the city aside from the commuter.
I love how in your ecosystem, in your diagram there, you also had students in there as part of that. Can you speak a little bit around, and I think we talk a lot about, you know, return of tourism and visitors, and we talk a lot about return to office and office workers, but there hasn't been a lot of conversation in terms of patterns of use in our educational institutions and the role that colleges and universities can play as anchors to a vibrant global city. How have colleges and universities in London been affected, and what are sort of the patterns there in terms of use and attendance by students? What's happening in London? Is it this gone back to the way it was, or is it somewhat different?
So I completely agree with you. Our universities are our anchor institutions in London in many ways. And I mean that in terms of students and talent, but also increasingly as placemakers. So what we see in London is the growth of really exciting innovation districts, where we have deep concentrations of research and development with students, with startups and scale-ups, entrepreneurship, with multinationals. And those districts, and there are several of them in different parts of town with different specialisms, are anchored by our major institutions, whether that's Imperial College, University College London, King's, and so on. So I think they are increasingly important players in the city. In terms of the students, we've actually seen probably a surprisingly resilient recovery of our students. We're really strong on student numbers at the moment. That's helped by a change in the immigration policy, in that anyone who comes and studies now in one of our universities gets a 2-year work visa. And that's obviously hugely attractive. What we've seen, the change we've seen in our student population, is actually driven more by Brexit than by the pandemic, in that we used to have higher proportions of European Union, so European students, and lower proportions of rest of world. And we now have a different balance, so we have fewer European and more rest of non-European students, particularly Indian. We have a big growth in Indian students, but we have large numbers of Chinese students as well, from Africa, from North America. It's a pretty global mix.
So that was my next question, and you brought it up as it relates to, you know, Brexit and thinking about attracting businesses to London. You know, obviously, you know, in our rankings, you know, London's been, you know, featured as the world's best city. A lot of that driven by the experiential quality of the city in terms of its cultural assets, institutions, its education system, talent of the workforce, et cetera. As you're going out and trying to, you know, recruit companies today from an investment perspective, has that narrative been affected by Brexit? Has the story changed as a result of COVID? How do you position and talk about London and its competitive advantages with respect to business and investment attraction now?
So of course, Brexit has changed the context, because it changes where we sit as a trading nation. But having said that, London has been surprisingly resilient in the post-Brexit era. And at the time of the Brexit vote, there are a lot of forecasts of this many tens of thousands of financial services jobs are going to leave London and go to Frankfurt or go to Paris or whatever. And that just hasn't materialized. We've seen significant net growth in employment in those sectors in the 5-6 years post-Brexit. We work mostly with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs solve problems for a living. So in some cases, Brexit causes complexity, but what we do is try and make it operationally as easy as possible. So we try and help businesses to navigate if there's a bit of extra administration or a bit of extra paperwork that has to be done because of Brexit. What we do is try and make it as easy as possible for businesses so it isn't off-putting. The other aspect for us is that London is a European city, and London very much remains a European city, and we're very committed to that. I should say, as an aside, I'm not a politician, but Londoners did not vote for Brexit. London voted very heavily to remain in the EU, so it's not something that had the support necessarily of the population of London. So we really invest in our relationships with other European cities because we see London at the heart of a European technology ecosystem. And if we want to compete with the US and we want to compete with China, we have to build a European technology industry that is based on our European shared values. And I think we can build a technology ecosystem in Europe, which is different from what we have in North America and different from what we have in China. But none of our markets is big enough to do that alone. We will only succeed if we act as a European group. And London is clearly by far the biggest technology city in Europe and also has the deepest pools of growth capital. So it is the regional centre. So we invest very heavily in our relationships with Paris, with Berlin, with Stockholm, Helsinki, and other cities, making sure that we're supporting their events, making sure we're taking businesses and encouraging them to expand into those markets, because London is a European city above all else.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about business events coming back online. As you think about events and London as a destination city, gathering place for many kinds of international events, have those become, more important in terms of as a platform for economic development and promoting the city? And what do you see as some of the future trends with respect to business events in our cities?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'd be interested to hear what you think. It still feels like it's in flux. We obviously, a lot of events now have a hybrid option, which they wouldn't have done before. At the same time, we're seeing absolutely huge delegate ticket sales for in-person events in London. So the appetite to be physically together is clearly there. So I'm not sure that bit of the market has quite bottomed out yet. From our perspective, absolutely business events are important because, to my point earlier about connections, they bring people together. And we're increasingly trying to be strategic in the events that we bring into London and aligning them with the sectors where we're really focused on growth. So where we have high growth technology sectors, bringing in really high quality events, whether it's life sciences, or we have a very big one later this year for green technologies. So trying to get our business events really lined up with the sectors that we're trying to grow more broadly, because there's no better opportunity to showcase your city's strengths to all the global decision makers on a topic than by hosting their event.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think as we think about business events, that obviously attendance hasn't come back up to where it was before. But I think perhaps, and it may never return to the exact same levels, because now it becomes discretionary to attend events. You could maybe attend hybrid. But I do think perhaps the influence that business events have has maybe become even more important with respect to economic development in terms of showcasing, featuring. So it's not about bringing necessarily the volume of people together. It's really about bringing the right people together that can support and hopefully invest in the ecosystem of that particular city. So really aligning, as you said, the events with the sectors that the city is strong in, and we start to see more of a mutual reinforcing loop happening there versus just, hey, we want to have an event for ABC association or organization here or there, and it's not tied into the local economy as much.
I agree, and the other thing we're seeing as a strong trend is, I hate this term, so forgive me, but bleisure. So the blending of business and leisure visits. And that's something we're very keen to encourage, partly because obviously if people stay longer, there's more spend, but also from a sustainability perspective, we're very much wanting to encourage longer stays. And so we are working with our event organizer clients to help them, to give information and to encourage delegates. Oh, why don't you stay for the weekend? And here are some great things you can do, because we're trying to encourage that blended stay. And it feels as though post-COVID, people are much more mindful of their travel. It doesn't mean they won't travel, but if people are going to travel and the carbon footprint of that, they're going to think carefully about how they're spending those carbon miles and how do I make the most of it. That actually plays to London's strengths, because London's a very multifunctional destination. You could come to London for a conference, also do a couple of days of meetings with clients, and then have a great couple of days of leisure. And you can't necessarily say that for all cities, which might be, you know, more heavily leisure or more heavily business. So that's something we're trying to lean into, but it's early days.
Yeah, whether we call it leisure, blended travel, residential tourism, we'll all have to agree on a term. But I do think there's this emergence of a new type of traveler that urban destinations are just starting to see now. Because of course, when people were remote working, they were going off to Bali or Hawaii or some exotic locale, working from a beach. I think sort of the novelty of that's worn off, and you know, people love cities, they love urban culture and experiences. And if they want to travel, and they also have more freedom than they had before in terms of where they work, in terms of location, does that actually create a new category of traveler, of these remote workers who could choose to take up residence, whether that's in London or New York or Paris or Barcelona, for a period of weeks or months, and really live the city, not as a tourist, but as a local, and work from that particular location. Amongst your team, have you guys thought about or talked about sort of the emergence of this new type of traveler? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think London has probably had that type of traveler historically more than most places. Maybe New York had it a bit as well, in that London has always been the kind of city where people would maybe come for a month or 3 months or 6 months, maybe when they're setting up a business or for various reasons. So we have had that kind of long stay traveler before, but I completely agree with you, it's growing. I think we have to think about the impact of anything like that on housing. Like many big cities, we have really serious housing supply constraints, and anything that takes housing out of the supply of housing for Londoners and for local families, we have to think about carefully. Having said that, it's clearly a strong economic driver. And I think during COVID, there was this fetish for this idea of work from anywhere. And I would say London isn't anywhere. If you're going to work from anywhere, go to the beach. But London is somewhere. And people who come and work in London, it's for reasons. So it's because their clients are there, because their partners are there, because they want to do a specific study course, or they want to live a certain lifestyle. It's not a generic, I want to go to the beach kind of destination. London's very particular, and people are in London when they know why they're there.
I think it's not only the issue around housing, it's also up to the hotel industry to think about how they respond to this new type of traveler, where, you know, I was in London a couple of months ago, and you can walk by the Hoxton and the lobby is absolutely packed at 2 p.m. with people and laptops and meetings, and then you can go into the Marriott down the street and it's completely empty. So I think there is some work to be done on the accommodation side to think about how we cater to that type of traveler better in the future.
Agreed. And the Hoxton is always packed. You can never get a seat in that Hoxton. You're absolutely right.
Exactly. So I think, running out of time in a bit, at the end, our last session today, we have Joe Pine, who's the author of The Experience Economy, kind of a seminal piece of work 20 odd years ago. So I'm looking forward to hearing, his thoughts on what's next for the experience economy in our cities. And he's going to talk about the emergence of the transformation economy. You had experiences kind of at the very heart. And as you think about that urban ecosystem with respect to visitors attracted by experiences attracting talent, students, which attracts companies and investment, what are some of the trends or any changes you've seen with respect to the experience economy and the types of experiences people are looking for when they come to London? Has anything shifted there, or is it kind of back to that traditional roots around dining, culture, et cetera?
So I think in terms of the experiences themselves, yeah, there's this new category of these immersive experiences, often based on kind of content and IP. So we've got a Stranger Things experience, we've got the Monopoly experience. experiences that are based on popular TV or film or characters or brands, and I think that will continue, because where you have really strong content brands, people want to experience that in real life. So we're definitely seeing that. But retail itself has changed, and if you now go and walk through the West End or one of our prime shopping districts, the retail is just beautiful. It's experiential. It's, you can touch, you can feel, you can personalize things, you can talk to people. You can do workouts in the store. It's a completely different kind of retail. So the retail itself has changed, and you can say the same for the dining. A lot of the dining is more experiential. But I'd say more broadly, when we talk about experience, we don't just mean experiences, as in things that you go and do for a fixed point in time. What we mean when we talk about the experience of London is, how does it feel to be in this city? So yes, that's about the museum, the gallery, the dining, the show, the shopping. But how do I get around the city? How do I navigate? How does public transport feel to use? If I'm somebody who's neurodiverse or uses a wheelchair, how do I access the city, and how does it feel to me? Do I feel welcome? Do I feel I can belong? Can I get food that meets my dietary requirements? How can I get easy access to drinking water? Are there green spaces where I can relax and get away from the crowd? So for us, experience is much broader than the specific experiences. It's about how the city makes people feel.
No question. And as you think about the future of cities and managing the visitor economy, the investment economy, business attraction to London, you mentioned it at the very beginning that you have a bit of an unusual governance structure. I think it probably gives you an advantage today, as we sort of see, in our own research, that the factors that attract visitors are now more closely aligned with the factors that are attracting talent, which is attracting businesses, and these overlapping circles are becoming closer and closer knit together. What are some of the advantages that you found as an organization with your model of having business and investment attraction with visitor and destination marketing all merged together? And are there any disadvantages to that for the people that are joining us that they should be aware of?
So I think there's really obvious advantages in terms of, exactly as you say, those things are becoming closer and closer together. And so being able to think holistically about the future of the city, how we want experiences to change, what are the sectors that we really want to grow, and how do we bring those things together, it matters. More broadly, organizations like ours are responsible for brand and the brand of our city. And cities need a brand that speaks to lots of different audiences, but is still coherent. And because we curate the London brand globally, whilst of course the way that we bring the brand to life for a visitor, for a tourist, a potential tourist, is completely different from how we might bring the brand to life for a capital investor, the essential truth of London and the core brand values are consistent. And I think that that's really important, and that's an advantage. I mean, beyond that, operationally, there are clearly advantages in that you can centralize lots of services. So we have one marketing team, a technology team, and they support across the piece, and there are economies of scale, but that's probably a given.
All right. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Hopefully the model and the work that you're doing will be good lessons to learn for other destination cities joining us from around the world for this World City Summit. And hopefully we'll see you in New York at the World City Global Forum this fall in person. Thanks so much, Laura.
Thank you.